Despite what you might be meant to believe, what I have here is in fact not an Xbox. It's called one, has an Xbox button, and is made at least partially by Microsoft, but it cannot play Xbox Series games. That is, unless they're ones that also have PC ports. Hey, what's up? I'm Kyler, and I'm gonna be taking care of things on the UFD Tech channel while Brett is in South Africa. I live in the US. That's me. The ROG Xbox Ally X is instead a handheld Windows gaming PC, which might seem pretty standard and run-of-the-mill these days, but what this one does different is giving you access to the Xbox, quote, full screen experience, which has been sort of hyped up to be Microsoft's answer to Valve's SteamOS for their somewhat comparable handhelds. For anyone wondering, this isn't exactly a home console or anything. It is literally a computer that's in a handheld form factor. Think more along the lines of a gaming laptop than an Xbox console. But at the very least, you do have the option to plop the thing in a dock and use it kind of like you would a classic living room box machine. It's essentially the quintessential Xbox branded Steam Deck, except there's one, no option for an OLED display. Two, since it's running a modified version of Windows 11 instead of Linux, you're getting drastically more game options since you're not just tied down to the Steam store. Plus, there's none of that janky anti-cheat interference that Valve deals with, so you can actually play popular competitive online games on the go. And three, it's just about double the price, which we'll get back to. This fella's powered by the AMD Ryzen AI Z2 Extreme processor, which is supposed to have Radeon 890M GPU performance, and the controller-inspired grip shape and integrated impulse triggers along with that Xbox full screen experience are what's gonna separate it most from the rest of the pack. The ROG Xbox Ally X is the higher tier option of the two Xbox branded Asus handhelds. And while this video is only gonna be focusing on the X, I just wanna get one thing out of the way first. What the freaking crap is going on with Xbox's naming conventions, Lois? The base model that comes in white is called the ROG Xbox Ally, and this one's called the ROG Xbox Ally X. Mouthfuls aside, why not call the white one the ROG Xbox Ally S? At least then it'd follow the nomenclature behind the Xbox Series consoles. I just don't get it, man. Anyways though, let's talk build quality on the ROG Xbox Ally X. First impressions of this thing are that it's surprisingly light for something this expensive and powerful. But before you even pick it up, you've already no doubt noticed that the shape and form factor are pretty reminiscent of another controversial handheld gaming system from a competing brand that, let's just say, people had some big qualms with. And yes, while the ROG Xbox Ally X shares some visual and ergonomical similarities with the PlayStation Portal, let's get one thing straight. This device does way more than the Sony one. Although I did find it pretty funny that when you look up really close at the grip patterns, it has little ROG Xbox characters embossed all over the thing, which is like a direct homage to the mini PlayStation symbols Sony puts all over their PS5 controllers. What's also silly is that unlike an actual Xbox, you can play PlayStation games on the ROG Xbox Ally X, as long as Sony has released the PC ports of them, that is. But stuff like God of War, Ghost of Tsushima, and Stellar Blade are all playable on this little guy. That, and you can do PlayStation Remote Play too. The speakers on this thing really surprised me, actually, and they can get seriously loud for something this small. But there's also a 3.5mm audio jack for when all you non-Bluetooth people gotta go out there and travel somewhere. The power button dual purposes as a fingerprint sensor too, but if you do need to input your lock screen password, by default, the ROG Xbox Ally X visually binds certain face buttons on the numbers to the on-screen pin pad, which is pretty convenient. Inside of the old box, you're gonna find the console itself, a cardboard kickstand that's become a hallmark of the ROG handhelds, and a 40-watt charger. Somebody please correct me on screen if I'm wrong about that. Along with some light reading. In terms of buttons, let me show you what you're working with here. You got your typical triggers, face buttons, control stick, D-pad, select start, but now there's an Xbox button that launches the Xbox game bar, the command center button beside that, which a short press opens Armory Crate and a long press opens Copilot, and this little library button on the right side of the screen opens your gaming library. There's also two programmable buttons on the back, which have been pretty commonplace in handhelds like this. Microsoft really harped on about how the controller grips are modeled after Xbox controllers, or at least inspired by them, and they made a point to include an Xbox button and keep the Xbox face button layout, and while sure, this looks arguably more like an Xbox controller than the previous ROG allies, it doesn't exactly feel like an Xbox controller. It feels pretty fantastic though, don't get me wrong. Other than the PlayStation Portal, this is probably the single most comfortable gaming handheld system I've ever had the pleasure of experiencing. It simply feels great, just different from an Xbox controller. Even the face buttons are kind of just a little flatter than you'd expect them to be. One thing they really killed it with though is the inclusion of the Xbox impulse triggers, which, if you're not familiar, are sort of Microsoft's take on the haptic triggers that Sony uses in their PS5 controllers, where there's feedback happening through individual motors inside the controllers, which also makes it more accessible to all types of players since there's no extra resistance happening like with a DualSense. It's just a little extra nice touch and one that you're only getting with the ROG Xbox Ally X. It's just normal Hall effect triggers on the non-X. Using the thing as a normal PC is fine, but there's notably no touchpads, which sucks for desktop navigation. But by default, the right stick is set to control your cursor, but in theory, that shouldn't matter a lot of the time because of that Xbox full screen experience feature I mentioned earlier, which I'm gonna elaborate more on now for yins. Xbox full screen experience. Yeah, I'm doing this again. Going into using the ROG Xbox Ally X, I was expecting the full screen experience to be something along the lines of SteamOS, where there is a dedicated gaming mode separated from a traditional desktop user interface. And while yes, that's all there, it's also quite a bit different from what you might be used to if you've ever played with your own or a friend's little deck. Similar to SteamOS, the Xbox full screen experience keeps their store at the forefront. This thing is Xbox City. It looks and functions pretty much exactly like the normal desktop PC app, which might seem a little underwhelming at first, but what's really impressive here is that it's not loading the desktop at all. Instead of opening Windows like you would on, well, Windows, opening a game or software launches a new tab, so to speak, which you can swap between by swiping up from the bottom of the touchscreen and selecting your destination. And it's actually a lot like using an Android, but it's technically still Windows. So again, you're getting all the compatibility that comes with that. You can instantly jump from full screen experience to desktop mode, which is different from a Steam Deck where the whole device has to go through a reset cycle first. However, going from desktop to full screen experience warns you that you could experience certain compatibility issues if you jump in the other direction. And they recommend doing a reset in this case. And what's likely happening here is they're trying to save system resources by not having to load in the normal functions of the desktop interface. But from our experience, running games in either desktop or full screen mode yielded a pretty similar result, which we'll get into in a second. One of the things that might take some getting used to if you're more of a console gamer coming over to an ROG Xbox Ally X is that unlike with a normal Xbox, PlayStation, or even Steam Deck, you can't adjust the device's settings on the thing's home screen. For that, you'll have to use the Asus Armoury Crate software that's become ubiquitous with their Ally line of handhelds. Display settings, battery profiles, button mappings, and more are all accessible through this, which can be launched through the press of a button on the left-hand side of the device that I talked about a minute ago. But the full screen experience comes pre-kitted with different video game storefronts like EA, Epic, and of course, Steam, all of which will automatically sync with your Xbox game library in the main full screen experience page. But one thing I found really nice is that you can just launch Steam and immediately enter big picture mode while still being in the Xbox full screen experience, which feels really handy if you want to like buy a game on Steam sale before launching it on your Xbox tab. Knowing all of that though, keep in mind that Microsoft really wants you to pay for that newly increased in price Game Pass subscription. So much so that it's literally the second tab down from the home button on the full screen experience. You literally have to scroll past it to get to your actual game library. Okay though, we get it. Full screen experience is new and cool and stuff, but what about the brass tacks of it all? How's this thing running the video games? Well, first I want to talk about what's inside the ROG Xbox Ally X, because it's packed to the gills with all the fixins. Specs. As I mentioned at the top of the video, the ROG Xbox Ally X is ballin' out with an 8-core, 16-thread Ryzen AI Z2 Extreme processor, 24 gigabytes of LPDDR5X 8,000 memory, a terabyte of M.2 SSD storage, and an 80 watt-hour battery. The screen's a 7-inch 1080p 120Hz FreeSync Corning Gorilla Glass Victus display, and it's got a built-in microSD card reader, which is distinct from the lower-end ROG Xbox Ally Non-X, the white one, since that one's got a Z2A processor with 4 cores, 8 threads, 16 gigs of LPDDR5X 6400 memory, a 512 gig SSD, and a 60 watt-hour battery. Everything else is the same between the two except the color and the fact that the X has the special impulse triggers and the non-X has normal Hall effect ones. You can use the ASUS Armoury Crate software to assign different power profiles or adjust the memory allocation to the graphics processing unit. How much the memory thing's gonna help you is gonna vary a bit depending on the game you're playing though. So we just wound up setting the thing to auto and then setting the power profile to turbo for all our benchmarks, which we also did with the device unplugged from the wall. You're gonna see a plug in the B-roll we took, but that is just the keyboard that I have off screen. We ran everything on the normal PC desktop mode to get our benchmarking software running properly in the background, so keep in mind that there's a chance that your mileage could also vary there a little bit if you're running in straight up Xbox full screen experience mode. Benchmarks. Starting off with a couple games that aren't supported by Steam Decks, either because they aren't on Steam or because of some sort of anti-cheat software conflict. The first of which we've got is Skate. And for as heavily as they seem to have featured this one in their marketing materials, the load times were actually pretty brutal. And while the average FPS stays high during gameplay, it's a fairly unstable experience overall. You can definitely play it, and I certainly did, but it'll kind of fluctuate between totally fine and what's essentially slow motion gameplay. With all that in mind, Skate was technically running at an average of 71 FPS at 900p medium settings with FSR set to quality mode. But the low 0.1% was so low at 7.2 that it was too inconsistent, and a lot of the time the game ran in literal slow motion, like I mentioned. Bumping down the visuals to 720 low yields a 91 average that's still a little choppy. It's definitely playable, but we sacrificed decent lighting effects and it makes the game look way too bright with this preset. What is going on here? Fortnite runs pretty great at 1080p low. You get that competitive high frame rate at an average of about 120, and we decided to break out Minecraft Windows Edition because why not? I'm pretty confident there are not many people even attempting to get this one running on a Steam Deck. But here on the Xbox ROG Ally X, we were able to play at 1080p with the vibrant graphics settings at just over 100 FPS average. Moving on to some games that you can technically play on a Steam Deck, although most of them are not going to run very well at all. Let's start with Expedition 33, which would only run with the GPU memory allocation set to auto. Any other manual number would automatically crash the game as soon as you try to load a save file. But Expedition 33 ran at around 37 frames on average at 720 low graphics settings, and never ventured too far from the lower 30s in either direction. And yet somehow this game looks and feels substantially more smooth than Skate. Granted, it probably helps that a large portion of Clair Obscur is turn-based. Comparatively, running this on the Neo Flip 1S, which has a different CPU, but also Radeon 890M level graphics and more memory, the Flip got about 6 FPS higher than the ROG Xbox Ally X. Next up, we have Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which, fun fact, is Steam Deck verified, so I had high hopes for this one, and it did put up a good fight, clocking at a 54 FPS average at 720 low, which is right around what we also recorded on the Flip 1S. The only problem is there'd be pretty choppy dips during high-intensity fight sequences, and if you've ever played the game, you'll know that that is a decent chunk of what's going on at any given moment. Far Cry 6 is starting to get a little up there in age, and despite looking pretty solid still, the ROG Xbox Ally X was able to crank this guy at 1080p Ultra at just shy of 37 frames on average. Honestly, I mostly tried the Ultra settings as a joke, but I was pleasantly surprised at the performance here. We also bumped the graphics quality down to high, lowered the resolution a couple times, and here we wound up with about 50 frames at 900p and 53 at 720. Black Myth Wukong blew us away with how crisp the visuals still managed to look at 720 low, and the ROG Xbox Ally X was still able to pull a 97 FPS average. Plus, if you wanted to increase those settings to 1080p high, you can still achieve a very playable 37 frames. Elden Ring was a little strange because Running it at specifically 720 high was causing intermittent crashes, but dialing that back to 720 low yielded a 49 frame average that peaked at just shy of 60 frames. And after sitting through the very long and depressing opening to Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice at 720 high, we were pulling 67 frames that peaked at over 90. Hogwarts Legacy always confuses me because any handheld I've ever tried it on has had issues, but at the same time they did a full Switch release. Regardless, Hoglegs runs on 720p low settings at 39 FPS. That is a little irritatingly, intermittently stuttery, but definitely playable if you want to. Cyberpunk 2077, I always like to throw a bunch of different tests at since they make it so easy to run their in-game benchmarks, so strap in for this. By default, the ray tracing low graphical preset was enabled, so feeling ambitious, I gave that a run on all supported resolutions, 1080, 900, and 720. And while 1080 was just shy of an experience that I'd be able to stomach, you could definitely play the game at a 20 frame average. You just might not have the best time. 900p brought it up to around 28 frames, but ultimately, if you want to have an above 30 FPS experience and absolutely cannot compromise on having ray tracing enabled, 720p will treat you decently at a 37 frame average. We also tried out the dedicated Steam Deck graphics profile at 1080 and 720, and both are actually kind of solid with around 45 FPS at 1080 and 50 at 900p. Next, with Oblivion Remastered, 720 low got us 42 frames, which might not sound great, and I was skeptical too, but I actually found this to be pretty nice, and I could absolutely see myself playing Oblivion like this. Whether or not I prefer this to the original version of the game that's running a higher resolution, I'm not sure, but still this gets a mildly surprised thumbs up from me. And let's not forget what'll no doubt be 2025 Game of the Year though, Garfield Kart 2, All You Can Drift. Give it up, people. Running this absolute inspiration from Mario Kart World at 1080p high averaged 48 frames, and 900p got 64. Performance here is absolutely phenomenal, as is always expected with the extensive catalog of well-optimized Garfield games. And as far as battery life on this jammer slammer, the 80 watt hours was enough to keep the thing running the main menu of Fortnite in the lobby pulled up for around 3 hours and 12 minutes. No word on whether hitting the gritty the entire time will affect that number though. Worth. All right. Let me level with yins. 1,000 US Pico de Gallos is pretty steep, but this thing is more powerful than the previous Z1 Extreme Allies, and all the Steam Decks. Plus, this is just kind of the price point we're seeing the higher end handhelds hit, regardless. The market's all fricky wicky these days. Heck, the Legion Go 2, a handheld with the same Z2 Extreme processor as the ROG Xbox Ally X, is set to retail for a full 350 US Cookie Monsters more than this guy. But that being said, you're also getting a substantially better screen situation with the OLED 8.8-inch 144Hz 2K display and the detachable Switch style controllers that give you access to things like mouse mode and the touch pads. And don't even get me started on the situation with the Ioneo Flip 1S we reviewed recently either. Yes, this is substantially out of quite a few people's price points, but it does deliver on being a top-of-the-line handheld PC. And Asus does so without compromising on build quality or overpricing for spectacle or special designs like other companies like Ioneo or GDP Win. Not to say that those companies make bad devices or anything. This stuff's just getting really expensive, and it's actually starting to get a little bit scary. Are you squeezing enough extra performance out of the ROG Xbox Ally X compared to something with a Z1 Extreme processor or a Steam Deck to justify a 40 to 50% price increase? Well, it depends on how much you value your money. The price of handhelds are decidedly increasing across the board, and while I'm super interested in the ROG Xbox Ally X, me personally, I'm not sure I'm convinced of it. Maybe toss in an OLED screen and we'll talk though. I don't know. During testing, nothing really jumped out at me as being sort of like an earth-shattering breakthrough in small form factor portable gaming. Other than the Xbox full experience though, I honestly found that whole deal to be pretty cool and intuitive. It's something new in a sea of Windows handhelds that honestly feels refreshing, and that combined with the super comfortable grips and impulse triggers really make me feel like the ROG Xbox Ally X is so close to being something special. All things considered though, I can't help but wonder how the official Valve sponsorship is gonna go with SteamOS on the Legion Go 2. It's kind of exciting, like is this the next console war type deal we might be seeing the beginnings of right now? Xbox full screen experience versus SteamOS, tickle me interested. If nothing else, I gotta say, this thing is easily the strongest, friendliest, if that makes any sense, and the most comfortable gaming PC handheld I've experienced as of yet. And I know it feels like I've been pretty hard on this old girl, but I really do like it. If I had to rate the ROG Xbox Ally X from 0 to 100, 0 being like a broken Game Boy with the batteries removed, and 100 being like a Steam Deck with an infinite battery that can run anything, I think I'd give it like 66 grippy greps out of 100. Yeah, that sounds good. Oh, hey, is that your dad? Is that your dad over there? Can you tell him I said hi? Thanks, buddy.